Imagine you had the opportunity of a lifetime to play a large part in something you are super passionate about. Maybe it's something you loved as a child. Maybe it's something that really spoke to you in your teenage years. Something that really meant a lot to you. You have to sacrifice your usual pay to be a part of this project, but it doesn't really matter, does it? That's how much this project means to you. If you didn't get the memo by now, you are Henry Cavill, and you just landed the lead role of an upcoming show as Geralt, The Witcher. Of course, that's a bit of conjecture on my part, but given the initial interviews and enthusiasm the man had for the part, I can't imagine his attitude being any different.
I'm incredibly fond of this character, and I will fight tooth and nail for him and to do him justice.
Can we be honest? Cut the BS. Netflix's The Witcher was not really that good. I mean, sure, there was stuff I liked in season 1. I liked the first couple episodes, Yennefer's especially, but she ran out of steam by episode 4. Ciri existed, and anything with Geralt was gold. But often, I wish he was the focus of the episode rather than the sub-story. There's about 4 scenes in this show that really stuck with me and stood out. Yennefer being sold for 3 gold pieces, Geralt's first conversation with Foltest, Nivellen admitting the true reason he got cursed, and Geralt's final words to Roach. These 4 scenes seem to capture the essence of the Witcher books, the tone that Andrzej Sapkowski was going for, and we have Cavill to thank for at least 2 of them. The Witcher Season 1 suffers from something I like to call the Game of Thrones effect. We need to stuff all these storylines into one episode because Game of Thrones did it, and Game of Thrones was successful. If we do it, we'll be successful too. I get it, Game of Thrones was a cultural phenomenon that changed TV, and we will likely never see anything like it again. Well, maybe never again. But just because Thrones does something doesn't mean every fantasy show should. One of the strengths of the Thrones books was the multi-storyline aspect. It just makes sense to make the show follow a similar vein. The first 2 Witcher books were written almost entirely from the perspective of Geralt. The chapters were dense with exposition, conversations, and philosophy. Any change in this material is going to involve making up storylines to fill in the gaps. The original author's writing blended together with the showrunner's writing, and if I had to choose between the author's writing and the showrunner's writing, I'll pick the author's every time. They're the person who actually made this IP popular, not you. The funny thing is, there is a way this 3-pronged story could have worked. Have a Geralt specific episode, have a Yennefer specific episode, and maybe one Ciri specific episode, because honestly she doesn't have much to do this season. Ciri's time to shine happens way later in the books, not at the start of the series. We need to build up to that, since Ciri's still a child. She's still growing up. Forcing all 3 stories to happen concurrently can only help to make the story lose focus, and muddy the message the original Witcher books were trying to tell. Would you believe me if I told you that over half of season 1 was made up by the showrunners? Anything with Geralt in it was adapted straight from the books. Everything else was made up. With Ciri, it's obvious. With Yennefer, maybe not so much. The first 2 books were more of a bundle of short stories focused on Geralt and his adventures. Sometimes he was joined by Jaskier or Yennefer. I love that Cavill describes Geralt as an amateur philosopher, because that's quite literally what he is. We spend a lot of time with Geralt, talking to others, discussing morality and philosophy in this fantasy world. The world of The Witcher is a special one, and I'd argue it's as much a character as the characters themselves. It's filled with real-life myths and legends, and tales that come from human imagination. It inherits both our most romantic ideas as well as our worst fears. Terrifying monsters come to life and coexist casually next to villages and towns. The grand politics of large kingdoms are complicated by and have to account for the existence of magic and myths coming to life, and yet the power of true love still exists and is enough to break curses. Is it no wonder that it makes for good dialogue when the people who live in this dangerous but fantastical world discuss their beliefs about it? Geralt talks. Geralt talks a lot. It takes a bit to get it out of him, especially when he's angry, but he likes to talk. He likes the sound of his own voice. And personally, I think he's a little bit lonely. You would be too if you spent most of your life on the road, with only a horse as company. So he takes any chance he can to talk about it all, about life and the meaning of all this. He likes to hear others' thoughts as well. He has a dry sense of sarcasm that really hits, but his sarcasm is mostly a defense against the constant fear and rejection he gets from people. He's guarded, but he's human too. Jaskier has a great mocking line about Geralt in the show. "Oh, I'm so sad and complicated." It perfectly describes his intended character. It's no wonder he likes to talk about philosophy. That's where a lot of the entertainment of Sapkowski's writing comes in. Fairy tale characters talking about the morality of fantasy tropes, deconstructing them and questioning the original meaning behind them. Isn't that compelling? At least it's more compelling than this.
Nice scars, shithead.
Firefucker.
Firefucker.
For fuck's sake! Go fuck yourself, you horse!
Any adaptation is going to have to cut down on that dialogue and dilute it, but to dilute it this much to make room for characters who honestly should have their own solo episodes only serves to ruin this aspect of the writing. It loses the point of what made these books so special. It turns these nuanced conversations into generic fantasy storytelling, rather than a satire on classical fantasy tales. Would you believe me if I told you The Witcher was originally a satire meant to poke fun at fantasy tropes? Look no further than the protagonist. Geralt is no knight in shining armor, yet he is often the one who takes action to resolve fighting and save people, but his involvement often makes things worse rather than better. There's no way you could tell that with these episodes. For example, the short story adapted in the first episode is a play on the tale of Snow White. What if we took the tale of Snow White and put it in this grim dark world? I'll explain the plot a little because I doubt the episode did a good enough job to even explain the point of that story. A princess chases a wizard all around the world, and he eventually locks himself in a tower to escape her grasp. Geralt meets with the wizard, and he explains his situation. The princess was born shortly after an eclipse, and as she grew up, she seemed to exhibit malicious behaviors. There are rumors about girls who are born after an eclipse. They're said to be inflicted by the curse of the Black Sun, said to have magical powers, malformed organs, and evil tendencies. The wizard was one of the people who studied these girls, and he was selected to study this princess. She was scientifically experimented on to test if her behavior was the result of the Black Sun, and if she had any magical powers. Years later, she certainly seems evil. The wizard tries to convince Geralt to kill her, but Geralt refuses, and meets with the princess to hear her story. The princess was treated badly by everyone around her. They all assumed she was evil, and never gave her the chance to be a good person. Neither her father nor her stepmother, who wanted to get rid of the girl to clear the line of succession for her own children. After some convincing, the girl promises to abandon her revenge and leave the village the day after. Geralt does his usual flirty thing, only later does he realize that he had been tricked. Geralt realizes the woman's plan is to threaten to kill the whole town, one by one, to guilt the wizard out of the tower. Geralt thinks he is forced into action, and if he does nothing, a brutal genocide will happen. He feels he has to intervene before tensions get too high. He easily and messily kills all the girl's men, but the girl herself is missing. When she finally turns up, she reveals to Geralt that he was wrong. She would not massacre a town. When she brought the ultimatum up with the wizard, the cowardly wizard laughed in her face and said he would not leave the town no matter who or how many she killed. Geralt had jumped the gun and caused unnecessary bloodshed. Everyone in the town, even the princess, turns on him, whether out of revenge for her fallen men or some sense of fate. She fights Geralt to the death as well. After the deed is done, the cowardly wizard finally comes out of his tower to glean over the corpse of the dead girl. The townsfolk, not knowing what really happened, now fear Geralt and reject him. He's told to leave the town and to never come back. And now he is forever known as the Butcher of Blaviken, a title he is commonly known by and constantly reminded of, all the way into The Witcher 3, if you consider The Witcher 3 to be canon. Imagine the guilt, the isolation, and the self-hate that Geralt has to live with. He's basically the greatest warrior in the world, but he's also the most feared and hated. It's all wrapped up neatly in one of his quotes in the short story. "If I am to choose between one evil and another, I'd prefer not to choose at all." That was the theme of this short story, and all its subtlety was diluted and lost. One of the most important stories that defined Geralt as a character was unfortunately lost in all the bloat. And what did we get in return? Cavill, the one person who seemed to have the most passion for the source material, left. Can you believe that? The adaptation was so bad, it pushed away its lead actor. It's a wonder that once upon a time, he was genuinely excited to play this role.
This feels as a viewer like a role that you were born to play. Does it feel like that to you now, 2 series in? Like, I was born for this?
I'm incredibly fond of this character, and I will fight tooth and nail for him and to do him justice, if that's answer enough.
That certainly is.